Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your thoughts no longer belong to you, not because you chose to give them up, not because you were warned, but because someone decided your mind was a battlefield. This is not science fiction. This is not a conspiracy theory. This actually happened. And for years, no one was supposed to know. In the early 1950s, the world was afraid. World War II was over, but peace never came. Instead, it transformed into something quieter and more dangerous. The Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a silent conflict, one that did not always use bombs or bullets. It used fear. And one fear stood above all others. What if the enemy learned how to control the human mind? Reports began to circulate. American prisoners of war in Korea were returning home, changed. Some recanted their beliefs. Some confessed to crimes they never committed. Some seemed broken in ways doctors could not explain. The word brainwashing entered public consciousness. Inside the U.S. government, panic followed. What if the Soviets had discovered a way to erase free will? What if democracy itself could be overwritten? Someone had to find out, no matter the cost. And science. In 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency quietly launched a program. Its name was MK Ultra. It would become one of the most disturbing chapters in modern history. Because the enemy was no longer across the ocean. It was inside the human mind. MK Ultra was not a single experiment. It was a system, a network of secret projects spread across universities, hospitals, prisons, and military facilities. Most of the people involved had no idea they were part of it. There were no consent forms, no warnings, no explanations, only test subjects. The goal was simple, at least on paper, to discover whether human behavior could be controlled, to see if memories could be erased, if personalities could be rewritten, if obedience could be programmed, to create a mind that could be broken and rebuilt. The methods were anything but simple. LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, amphetamines, barbiturates. Drugs were administered without warning. People were told they were part of sleep studies, or anxiety research, or therapy. In reality, they were being poisoned. Some were given massive doses of LSD, far beyond what was considered safe. Others were drugged for days. Some were locked in rooms with no sound, no light, no sense of time. Sensory deprivation, the brain, left alone long enough, begins to destroy itself. Electroshock therapy was used, not to heal, but to erase. Patients were shocked repeatedly until memories fractured, until identity dissolved, until nothing recognizable remained. One CIA document described the goal clearly: to disorient the subject completely. That word, subject, was intentional. They were no longer people. They were materials. Universities participated, hospitals participated, doctors, psychologists, and researchers participated. Some knew exactly what they were doing. Others were told lies, and some asked no questions at all. Among the victims were college students, military personnel, prisoners, psychiatric patients, ordinary citizens who walked into the wrong place at the wrong time. Some volunteered for what they believed was harmless research. Others never volunteered at all. One man was a scientist. Frank Olson worked for the U.S. Army. In 1953, without his knowledge, he was given LSD by his own colleagues. Afterward, he became paranoid, depressed, afraid. 9 days later, he fell from a hotel window in New York. The CIA called it suicide. Decades later, his family learned the truth. But Frank Olson was only one name. There were many others. Most will never be known. Because in 1973, as investigations began, the CIA destroyed the majority of MK Ultra documents, burned, shredded, erased. What we know today comes from fragments, survivor testimonies, court cases, declassified files that slipped through destruction. And even those reveal something chilling. This was not an accident, it was policy. By the mid-1950s, MK Ultra was no longer an experiment on the edges of science. It had become routine. What began as fear had turned into process. What began as questions had turned into procedure. Inside the CIA, the moral line was no longer visible. The experiments expanded. They were no longer limited to laboratories or hospitals. They moved into the real world, into bars, hotels, apartments, places where people felt safe. The CIA created secret locations known as safe houses. From the outside, they looked ordinary. Inside, they were monitored rooms, two-way mirrors, hidden microphones, observation booths. Men and women were brought inside. They were offered drinks. They were given drugs. They were watched. Some of the subjects were prostitutes' clients. Others were random civilians. They were never told they were part of an experiment. They were never asked for permission. They were simply used. In one CIA report, the language is cold, clinical, almost bored. The subject was administered LSD without prior knowledge. Behavior was observed. No names, no emotions, no consequences. The goal was not therapy, it was control. Could fear override reason? Could confusion erase loyalty? Could identity be dismantled under pressure? They wanted to know how far the mind could bend before it broke. One technique involved sensory deprivation. Subjects were placed in rooms where sound was eliminated. No light, no touch, no time. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Some people began hallucinating almost immediately. Others cried. Others begged. A few never fully recovered. Another method combined drugs with hypnosis. Subjects were placed into altered states and given suggestions, sometimes harmless, sometimes violent, sometimes contradictory. The idea was to see if a command could bypass conscience. Could someone be made to act and not remember why? There were experiments involving sleep deprivation. Subjects were kept awake for days. Their speech slurred, their thoughts unraveled, their sense of self faded. When exhaustion reached its peak, suggestions were introduced. The brain, desperate for rest, becomes vulnerable. Electroshock therapy was used again, but not as medicine, as erasure. Repeated shocks fractured memory. Patients forgot names, faces, years of their lives. Some were shocked dozens of times, more than any medical standard allowed. One CIA psychiatrist described it as psychic driving. The idea was simple: destroy the mind, then rebuild it. Erase the person, insert something new. Universities played a critical role. Prestigious institutions received CIA funding. The true source of the money was hidden. Researchers believed they were working on cutting-edge psychology. Some suspected nothing. Others suspected and stayed silent. Prisons were another target. Inmates were offered reduced sentences, or money, or privileges. Many agreed. Some did not understand what they were agreeing to. Others were never given a choice. The mentally ill were especially vulnerable. Patients trusted doctors. Doctors betrayed that trust. People already struggling were pushed further until there was no way back. One survivor later said, "They didn't just take my memories, they took my sense of being human." By the late 1950s, the program had grown massive. Hundreds of sub-projects, dozens of institutions, thousands of subjects, and almost no oversight. Inside the CIA, success was hard to measure. There was no clear breakthrough, no moment of control, just damage, confusion, broken lives. But instead of stopping, the program continued, because stopping would mean admitting failure. Some within the agency began to worry, not about the victims, about exposure. What would happen if the public found out? What would happen if Congress asked questions? What would happen if this ever left the shadows? Yes. In 1963, a report quietly criticized MK Ultra. It acknowledged ethical problems. It questioned effectiveness. But it did not end the program. It merely renamed parts of it, reorganized them, buried them deeper. Then came the 1970s, a decade of distrust. Vietnam, Watergate, whistleblowers. The public began questioning authority, and the CIA found itself under scrutiny. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of MK Ultra files. Truckloads of documents were burned, shredded, eliminated. Years of records vanished in days. But not everything was destroyed. Some files survived by accident, stored incorrectly, forgotten, and those fragments would later expose the truth. In 1975, Congress began investigations. Survivors testified. Families demanded answers. The CIA admitted that MK Ultra existed, but claimed most records were gone. No names, no full lists, no accountability. The question was asked, how many people were harmed? The answer was never given. No one was convicted. No one went to prison. Most victims received nothing. No apology, no justice, only silence. And yet the most unsettling question remained. Did it really end? Or did it simply change its name?
For the people who survived MK Ultra, the program did not end when the experiments stopped. It followed them home, into their sleep, into their relationships, into every quiet moment where memory should have felt safe. Many survivors struggled to describe what had happened to them. How do you explain fear without a cause? Panic without a trigger? Memories that feel chujimi, not yours. Some were diagnosed with mental illness. Others were told the problem was stress, or imagination, or weakness. Very few were told the truth. And some victims spent years in psychiatric care. Others lost jobs they could no longer perform. Marriages collapsed, families broke apart. Children grew up with parents who were present, but unreachable. People who once had personalities became shadows of themselves. One survivor later said, "They didn't just experiment on my mind. They rewired my life." When congressional hearings finally took place, they were brief, controlled, limited. Officials spoke carefully, always passive voice. Mistakes were made. Standards were different at the time. There was no intent to cause harm. But intent does not erase damage. Families demanded names. They demanded numbers. They demanded accountability. They received none. Most documents were gone, destroyed before anyone could read them. History, reduced to ashes. A few victims received financial settlements, small amounts, without admissions of guilt, without apologies. Money for silence. The official position became clear. Yes, it happened, but not like that. Not as bad, not often, not anymore, and certainly not today. But history teaches something uncomfortable. When power operates in secrecy, oversight becomes optional. When fear becomes policy, ethics become obstacles. MK Ultra did not begin with cruelty. It began with fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of an enemy. Fear of being powerless. That fear justified everything that followed. The most disturbing part of MK Ultra is not the drugs, not the experiments, not even the suffering. It is the logic behind it. The idea that some lives can be used for the protection of others. That consent is negotiable. That morality is flexible under pressure. That the mind itself is territory. Technology has changed since the 1950s, but power dynamics have not. Today, data is collected silently. Behavior is analyzed constantly. Influence is refined, targeted, optimized. No syringes, no shock rooms, just algorithms. The tools are different. The question is the same. Where is the line? And who decides when it can be crossed? MK Ultra forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always announce itself. It often wears lab coats, speaks calmly, uses words like research and security. It hides behind classification stamps and destroyed paperwork. This is why remembering matters. Not to assign guilt to the past, but to recognize patterns in the present. When survivors speak today, their voices are quieter. There are fewer of them. Age has taken what the experiments did not. But their message remains consistent. They do not ask for revenge. They ask for recognition. One survivor said, "If people know what happened, maybe it won't happen again." That hope is fragile, but it is all that remains. MK Ultra did not fail because it did not work. It failed because it should never have existed. Because the moment a government decides that the human mind is expendable, freedom becomes an illusion. This story is not about the past. It is about vigilance. Because the most dangerous experiments are not the ones we remember. They are the ones we convince ourselves could never happen again.